Okay, so the recording has started.
All right, awesome. I'd like to make a motion to open the meeting.
I will second.
All right, perfect. All right, we have 4 attendees. I'm thinking that we're going to have a lot more given the interest for.
We have 5. We have 5.
Oh, nice. The phone in. I suspect we'll have even more when it comes to the North Barry and Jefferson Avenue 4-way stop. So I'm thinking of opening the floor pretty much from the onset, and we'll try to limit each person's time to speak, as I'm sure each person has quite a bit to say. But yeah, let's kick it off. New business, item number 3, which is the issue with speeding on North Barry Avenue as you approach Jefferson Ave. Let's start from the top with the dial-in. Dan, do you mind promoting the 917 number?
Could I just make a suggestion that we to be fair to everyone, that we do limit the time to speakers? Can we do
Yeah,
that somehow?
absolutely.
I mean, I can just set something up on my
Yeah,
phone.
just because I know there's a lot of interest here and a lot of concern. So I think just being fair, so everybody has time to share their viewpoint. I think that it's important to if you can be timekeeper, Dan, that'd be great.
Yeah. How much time would you like to allot? You're the chair, Brian.
I
so-
defer to the chair.
What's the standard operating procedure? Is it 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
So,
Is it-
for
Gary said 5.
No
Yeah.
more than 5, I think, is what it should be.
yeah.
Okay.
Give me 1 second.
So a hard stop at 5 minutes and
I think-
maybe a check in at 2, just to let them know that they're about halfway done.
I think that's fair.
Perfect. All right, who do we have the pleasure with speaking with?
Hi, this is Dawn Wright. Good evening.
Oh, hey, Dawn, how's it going?
Done.
I'm fine. Is this Brian?
Yep.
Hi, Brian. How are you? Nice to speak
Good.
with you.
No, likewise. Thanks for making the time this evening. Definitely appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I don't think
So-
John Wright is for Jefferson. Are you calling about Jefferson, Miss Wright?
No, I'm calling about Stanley Avenue and Mount Pleasant.
Okay, well, let's start with that. I guess we took a little bit of a shot in the dark because it's just the dial-in number. So, and it's no harm, no foul. So, yeah, we'll start with the Mount Pleasant and Stanley issue. So, Dawn, you have the floor.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me first begin by saying thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I am a resident at the Sweetwater, which is on Stanley Avenue. One entry is on Stanley Avenue and the other one is on Bishop. I'm actually calling today regarding an issue that now I'm finding as I do more questioning around the neighborhood, seems to be something that has been ongoing for a number of years. I have lived at this residence now for a year and a half. However, I grew up in Mamaroneck, attended Rhinebeck, so I'm very aware of quite a number of these streets that you have listed here. Not only did I grow up here, my family, so we are longtime Mamaroneck residents. My concern with the Stanley Avenue in Mount Pleasant, as it's stated on the agenda, is that it is a blind turn. And the reason why is when you're coming down Stanley Avenue and you come to the stop sign, and I hope you're familiar with that area, there's the barber shop on the corner, and across the street is the apartment building. There's also cars parked along Mount Pleasant. You are completely blind to the oncoming traffic coming down Mount Pleasant from Mamaroneck Avenue. As you know, it all kind of comes together, whether you're coming down Mamaroneck Avenue, coming down Halsted, as well as coming off of Mamaroneck Avenue out of the village, and you're making that left turn. But if there are cars parked on Mount Pleasant, you absolutely cannot see to make the left. And many people now that I've spoken to are starting to avoid that left turn altogether because it's dangerous. the reason why I'm bringing it to your attention as well is because my daughter was actually in an accident there, coming off of Stanley Avenue, where the airbags deployed. The front of the car, because she's edging out. And when you're edging out, the other part of the concern is when you're edging out, you're actually blind to the right as well. So you have the cars coming down Mount Pleasant from the post office, right? Coming down from Palmer. So even if you start to look to the left and you say, oh, I'm clear that way, you then have to look to the right to see if you're clear that way in order to make that left turn. The impact was so severe that the airbags deployed as well, and she's basically at a stop.
Is she okay?
So she is okay, thank God. Yes, she is okay.
Good.
And the car was totaled. But the other thing is, I also have on, they should be on the line as well, Dale Cooper, who's also a resident, along with Larry Rakowski, who's also a resident here at Sweetwater. I have also been inching out gradually, and I also made a final determination, which I wish I had communicated to her because she was visiting, that I no longer go out that way anymore. I go up Maple. And so what I would like to propose, and believe me, I am in no way, shape, or form a person who has studied traffic patterns or how to alleviate traffic situations. But one key thing, and I've taken numerous pictures and videos, what I found is if the two cars that are parked closest to the corner on Mount Pleasant, as well as if you're coming from the train station, right? So the two cars parked, there's parking spaces there. If somehow those two parking spaces could be eliminated, which would give you a clearer view looking, if you were to come up to that stop sign and look to the left. And then if possible, and this might be a bit of more of a stretch, one parking space removed from in front of the barbershop, which would also give you a clearer view to the right. Now, what was most interesting, and I'll just give you this little aside, is that everyone seems to be aware of this street. The police officer that responded, he responded with, well, yes, there are often accidents here. The mayor was aware, and I'm sure you may have had previous submissions of people saying, maybe this is something to look at. But I really think for people's safety that, I really would appreciate this being looked into. I mean, I guess from my standpoint, I don't want to have to ease out on a prayer. And sometimes I do find myself going, and what also happens is when people, and I was watching this because I sort of stood on the corner for a while, is that people edge out and then they accelerate because they feel like, okay, this is my time. And you don't want that happening either. So
that makes sense.
Go ahead.
Even as you were talking, I brought it up on the Google Maps and Google Street View. And if you put yourself in the situation, even with Google's photos, you could see a truck pretty much edged right up against the corner, as well as another car on Mount Pleasant, which it makes a lot of sense.
Brian, is there
Yep.
some way that we can all see the street that you're looking at?
Yeah, one sec. Let's see. I don't see an ability to share screen. Oh, there we go. Share. Can you guys see okay?
Yes.
Yes.
So if you're approaching Mount Pleasant Avenue from Stanley, and Dawn, I'm not sure if you could see this, but for folks on the line. Oh,
go
you're
ahead.
on the phone.
Yeah.
But for folks on the computer, like you could look right here and you could see the blind spot between this building. I think part of it too is just the construction of the building. There's a pillar almost flush against the corner, as well as the truck and another Honda right on the other corner. So it makes a lot of sense. If you
So
go
again,
back a
I
little
mean,
bit.
I don't, yeah. And so what happens also too, just to give you a clearer sense, and I watched this as well, standing on the corner. So there was say for example, a car does pull out. So the car pulls out to make the left. But if there's traffic, which often there is traffic, so basically they're just looking for an opening, right? So they pull out, but they can't make the complete left. You see what I'm saying? They can't turn completely into that left-hand lane. So they're slightly extended back, their car, and then the car that's coming off of Stanley, it's edging up as well so that it can try and see. And what happens is that then alleviates the space that for the cars coming down Mount Pleasant.
Just- I don't mean to, interrupt, but the 5 minutes is up, but obviously.
Oh, that's fine. That's
Yeah.
fine. I think,
Thank you, Don.
yeah. So again, thank you very much for and I really appreciate if you have any other questions or, any feedback that you provide as you look into this, I'd really appreciate that. As far as, I'd like to be able to communicate it to people in the building.
Very valid
Thank you.
concerns.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you very
Don, for
much.
bringing this up.
Brian.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Brian, are we
Thank you.
going to comment on this now or go to the next issue? Because I have a comment about this.
Yeah, no, go for it.
So I was there this afternoon. If you look at the cars where the building is, there's a sign that says no parking from here to the corner. So it's about 20, 25 feet. You can see there's a space from back, back, the other side of the street.
Yeah, sorry.
There, yeah, you were just there. No, on
Basically where the
Mount
tail end
Mount
of the truck
Pleasant.
is.
On Mount Pleasant. This is Jeff, that's Stanley. Yeah, they're right there. So you can see the space between that car and the corner. The reason there's a space, there's a sign that says no parking from that, where that car is, to the corner. So there is a lot of visibility. And as you approach, if you're coming down Stanley and you're either going to make the left or right onto Mount Pleasant, there's a lot of room to go. So the stop sign is back further by the building. If you inch up slowly, I think you can see cars coming down
Yeah.
and up. Okay, but I think the bigger problem is cars speeding down there, that maybe there's not enough time for someone to make a decision. So I understand what you're saying, but you do have space on Mount Pleasant on the other side of the street. And I agree that maybe removing it right there where that black truck is.
Mhm.
I think she's suggesting make right there. If we were to remove that parking space, that may give more visibility.
Yeah, that's how I see that as a big problem, because you're limited as well from like the construction of the building as well. And like the
Oh, absolutely.
concrete
I'm sorry,
pillars.
I was wrong. Not that truck. That's Stanley. I'm talking about on,
The Toyota,
Mount
Pleasant.
the Toyota over here.
not that one, on the street by the barber, this in front of the barber shop.
Or here.
No, barber shop is across the street from the building. There you go. That's the barber shop on the corner. So removing that white car, for example,
Oh, okay.
I think that's what she's asking for.
Well, I think she's asking for both sides. She was
Yeah.
asking for two on the side by the cemetery and one by the barber shop. Is that accurate?
Is she still there?
Oh, yes, I'm still there. Yes, that is accurate. And I know my 5 minutes is up, but I would also wanted to make note that if a truck is parked, even though there is that, whatever you said, approximately 20 feet. But if there is a truck parked in that first spot, you're as blind as if there was an SUV parked in that first spot.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because we've had Amazon trucks pull up there as well. Yeah, it's just not an easy turn. It really isn't. Yeah, but thank you.
Dan,
Yeah,
would we be able to? No, go on.
I almost feel like yes, I mean, I could see removing the spot there coming from the avenue, but because of the way that street is angled, it's still problematic. I mean, that's gonna help, but I could see how people make the quick turn off the avenue there and kind of come speeding up Mount Pleasant, and it's a problem there. I see it a little more complicated than that, but definitely taking
Mhm.
out that one spot there is helpful, because I mean, it's not, maybe it's just me, but I remember it's kind of like an angled street coming up. Is that correct?
That's
Yeah,
correct.
and, you
Yeah,
know,
and
just,
the other thing too, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The other thing is there is a sign posted. It's past the barber shop.
Mhm.
You can't see it. I noticed it walking past it. It's the only sign that sets a speed limit, and the speed limit on that street is supposed to be 20 miles per hour going into the bend. And well, I'm telling you, when those cars come up from underneath from the train station, they are going way faster than 20 miles an hour.
Well, and also, like whoever mentioned earlier, when you're looking down Stanley, I mean, you have the tall building there, you gotta look around, and then you have a cemetery, you gotta look over. So you really
Yeah.
almost can't
Yes.
see you almost can't see to your left. It's almost like a blind
No.
entry point.
so I just want
It is.
to just give you a couple of comments for some context here. So first, you know, when the sign, it's a yellow sign with a speed, that's advisory. That's not enforceable.
Yeah, but either way, that's fine.
I'm
But
just
20
saying
yeah.
it's, you know, it advises, it's not an actual speed limit. I'm not
Right.
enforce that.
Mhm.
So as far as this intersection, the things we could control here are parking spaces. Physical changes, Mount Pleasant is a county roadway. So we couldn't do anything physically to the roadway without their permission. And I think that if they want, if we came to them and request, they would give us the opportunity to pay for it. We are looking at trying to improve the Mamaroneck, Halsted, Mount Pleasant intersection. But again, we need the county approval on that. We've been working with them for years on that. So that may, you know, see some benefit, but that's not something that's going to happen in the next 6 months. But that is on our radar. We've been talking with them for a while about that. You know, for many years, they wouldn't agree to let us do anything over there, but
What could we make Stanley a one-way street? What does that take?
well, that's a act of the board. I mean, and it's a fairly standard roadway. You know, there are a couple of, you know, would you make it a one-way street going away from Mount Pleasant?
Yes.
I mean, you could recommend that.
I
mean,
would
don't know if it would-
suggest, go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's something go right ahead.
Yeah, the other part to that is that it's a left. There's also a left turn from Mount Pleasant into Stanley. That also can be tricky at times as well for people, because the speed of the cars coming down, coming from, I just say from the train station, is also hard for people to make the left into Stanley. So I don't know if in relation to what I'm seeing, I don't know if we necessarily need it to be a one way, but what needs to be done is basically eliminate the blind turn.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think,
in my suggestion.
yeah, it seems like you're suggesting it's probably 90% visual obstructions.
Exactly. It's 90% visual obstruction.
So like I said, I mean, as far as what the village has control over is the parking on Mount Pleasant. You know, we have no control over the physical geometry of the roadway, because that is a county roadway.
Right. But if, like I mentioned earlier, but if there was a way to possibly take out a spot, take out another, I think that would give everybody a bit more peace of mind. It's not, you know.
Yeah, Dan, would we be able to, because Dawn mentioned that, you know, her daughter is one data point and other folks within the condo have reported issues and accidents, and there was anecdotal evidence of police officer commenting too on number of accidents. Could we quantify that by running actual statistics, and that'll help us make a more definitive suggestion, if we could say like, hey, there's been 100 accidents, whatever the number's been, then it gives us a little bit more ammunition towards making the recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, the PD should be able to pull the accident data. I think all they do is they look at the street and the various intersections along that, and they can quantify what's happened over the last several years. Is that accurate, Tom?
I believe so.
Yeah, I don't have access to the system. I don't run the reports, but I think that's a pretty
Okay.
standard report to be able to run.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
What is the standard footage that you should be from curb in? Standardly throughout the village?
Well, I mean, there is no standard. I mean, the New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law doesn't really speak to anything about parking at intersections aside from the fact that you cannot park within 15 feet of a stop sign unless the local municipality has signed it otherwise or has installed parking meters. But I think, at those there's only one stop sign, which is, there's a hydrant right there. So that's already not allowed. And it looks like it's a good 25 feet that it's been set back between the corner, I guess I would call it the northwest corner, and that first utility pole by the cemetery.
And I will say also too, the parking spaces go all the way back to the beginning edge of that cemetery. So when the other situation is, yes, there is the 20 feet, but when you're there and you look to the left, if all those parking spaces are filled, you can't see the roadway at all. There's no point where you could actually see the oncoming traffic. Because they go all the way back to Smashburger.
Just have it up here. Goes all the way back. It's definitely a challenging spot, for sure. I want to propose that we run the accident report, and then in a follow-up, like that'll help us make more of a data-driven decision as far as removing, perhaps it's multiple parking spots, perhaps it's just one to start, but there's a number of different areas where it seems like it can be remedied as far as making that, dealing with the physical limitations.
Brian, I know,
And
I know you mentioned that Mr. Rutkowski was, I think he has his hand raised. I think you said he was here to talk about this item as well.
yes, Larry.
Yeah,
Yeah, do you mind promoting him, Dan?
absolutely. There you go.
Hi there.
Hey, Larry.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
I think it's a very fair assessment that or very fair suggestion to try to make an assessment. My observation is clearly this is during the day. I'm guessing 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Google shot here is during a very low traffic point. When there is a tractor trailer coming under the trestle and up on Mount Pleasant, it's barreling up Mount Pleasant. And similarly, when it's coming down, I guess it's Palmer, around by that curve by the post office, it's barreling down that hill. And that view you have right now,
Look.
you see the white van?
Yeah.
That white van is fighting the traffic to the east, which is coming down Mount Pleasant, and at the same time is battling the traffic that's coming from under the trestle from Mamaroneck Avenue up to Mount Pleasant. The other difficulties you have is you see that white moving truck. Well, he's not supposed to be parked there. And if it could be, I don't mean to point fingers, a UPS, a FedEx, an Amazon truck, they just want to park the truck, get to the building, throw the package in and get out. My concern is even more so, and I know the rule is stop selling after you've made the sale. But it's children and it's pedestrians and it could be wheelchair bound people. Just imagine 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 7:30 in the morning, school buses, trucks, delivery. They're not getting through that intersection. The suggestion to make, and I don't mean to sound argumentative, the suggestion to make Stanley a one-way road, I think is going to be fraught with quite a bit of objection. Let's bear in mind that Bishop, which is on the west side of Sweetwater, is a one-way, essentially an alley. So if you make this section of Sweetwater a two-way street, you're going to be going around and around and around, perhaps just make a left turn or a right turn. My suggestion would be is go out with your iPhone during a busy traffic time, take a video, and you'll see what's going on. And of course, during the week, it'll be lesser traffic during the weekend. It is a task to make that right turn or left turn. I'll admit, I have a big SUV. So people, they say big truck, they get out of the way. Everyone doesn't have a big truck, so they don't have the power of the size of the vehicle. And again, Mr. Williams, with your view now with this white van, he or she is struggling to get out on that intersection. I'll stop there.
No, it makes sense. And given the fact there's multiple apartments and condo buildings there, I'm sure the trucks are quite prevalent in parking right there and just,
Yeah.
as you said, getting in with a package quick, getting out, but.
Well, it's all understandable.
Mhm.
However, the most important and prevalent issue here is safety. And it's not safe now. It really isn't. Compound it with a rainy day or a rainy evening, compound it with snow, the cover of darkness during the evening, all of these things. Again, I'm not picking. This is 10 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Beautiful, clear day, no traffic practically. It's not really representative of what goes on during the higher traffic times.
Yeah, no, good point, Larry. Dan, what's the process like in at least flagging something to the county? Like you mentioned that the Halsted, like that's a long time coming. And I imagine like issues with the county might be a little bit longer in terms of getting resolution, but.
I think, generally I would try to, avoid doing that if I can. I mean, if it's more a matter of a visual obstruction, which is something we can address administratively, I'd rather do that first. I seem to recall that there were requests for crosswalks across Mount Pleasant across Stanley to the other side of Mount Pleasant.
Mhm.
And I think that was going to require some, work with the county. And I think we didn't want to do that, especially because, I mean, there is, we were looking at, trying to cure the crosswalk issues we have at the corner, since I have to imagine most of the pedestrian traffic is going that way to begin with.
Might I make one other suggestion?
Mhm.
Mr. Williams, okay?
Yeah, go for it.
You see where the black,
The
I
Cadillac
think it's
SUV.
the Chevy SUV, yeah. What if you put a red bag on that meter? I'm not sure if red bag means the meter is out of service or it means no parking. And you try to ease that spot out of use. And, first it's a red bag and then maybe a cone, and maybe you do the red bag or the cone in front of the barber shop, and you try to get the public who may be used to parking or looking for that parking spot, get used to the idea it's going out of service.
Yeah, no, it's a good suggestion. I mean, ultimately, the safety, pedestrians, kids, whomever is of the utmost priority. So I always want to keep that top of mind, and you know, even if it inconveniences some folks, like the fact that we are prioritizing safety really with anything that we do. I really want that to be our North Star. I do appreciate the
Yeah,
suggestion.
Just, typically when you bag a meter, motorists tend to think that they can park there for free. So, but, I tend to, I'm not, after doing this for a while, I'm not, I'm concerned about losing 40 parking spaces, not one parking space.
Yeah, right.
So that's, um, you know,
It,
that's kind of always been my approach to it.
that,
I'd like to
propose-
suggest, Brian, that we pull some data on this and move to the next topic. I think we've seen what we can see on this, and there's some other things that we can discuss that
No, absolutely.
need to get discussed.
Lieutenant Falcone, would you be able to pull the data, the accident reports for this intersection? And then once we have the data, and the data will help formulate a suggestion. Is it one spot? Is it 3 spots? Like whatever, the next step is, as far as that suggestion, we'll be able to have a more data-driven conversation. So would you be able to do that for us? Or
Yeah, sure. We'll get it to you.
okay. No, and
Thank
Larry
you.
and Dawn, thank you.
again.
Thank
No,
you
thank
very,
you again. And I do have video, Brian, which I will share with you. So you can have that as well.
No, we appreciate it. I know Robert said that he
Yeah.
was out there this morning, and I think we'll all try
Yeah.
to have a closer look. But
Oh, I
I mean,
appreciate
I was going to the post
Yeah.
office today, and like I'm trying to
Yeah.
think back in my head if I saw it as an issue, but it was in the middle of the day, so maybe traffic wasn't, rush
Yeah,
hour like. So.
And Dawn,
Thank
and
you.
Larry, I walk that every single day. So I'm very aware as a pedestrian on that, what that intersection looks like. And
Oh, I appreciate it.
there's some other issues like the road, in my opinion, is too wide right there. If we narrowed it a little bit, it would slow everybody down. But as Dan said, it's not our road. So there's other ways to get people to slow down, and maybe we can think about that moving forward. But yeah, I think we know it well. I certainly do. So thanks
Okay.
for sharing.
Okay. Well, no,
You're
thank you
welcome.
again. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
Bye-bye.
All right, perfect. Dan, would you mind promoting GA Jager?
Absolutely. Okay, okay.
Hello?
Hi there.
Hello.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, of course.
So I live on 1511 Mamaroneck Avenue with my husband, Chris, and our 2 children. And we have a driveway on the side of our house, but we don't normally both use it. We have 2 cars. Normally, one of us parks in the driveway and one of us parks in front of the house to try and leave space to the left of our driveway when we come out. Because when you come out of the driveway, it's pretty hazardous for the oncoming cars, especially the cars in the right lane. We usually try to time the light by sound view. We can judge when there's no cars coming that, we're good to go. But the problem is if we don't get that spot in front of our house, cars, because there's an apartment building right to the left of us, they'll park right up to the edge of our driveway. So when we come out of the driveway, it's impossible to see to the left. So we can't, inching out is very dangerous. A couple of weeks ago on a Sunday morning, coming out of the driveway, I just missed getting hit, and you know, parking has always been a pain, but we've dealt with it for the past 10 years. Now, my son got his license, and that's when I decided to try and do something about this, because, you know, it's dangerous. So we think maybe putting no parking, we usually park our car like 10 to 12 feet from the start of our driveway to leave room so no car can park in front of us. But that's not, we can't always do that timing wise. So we think maybe painting yellow lines saying no parking can avoid this issue. I think, Robert, you came to see the house today, right? That was Robert. So, if you're more than welcome to come and try to come out of my driveway. It's kind of hazardous. So that's it. We're asking you to consider that. Or if you have other suggestions, that's just one that we thought could happen.
No, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Robert, do you have any, I think you're on mute.
Robert, we can't hear you.
There
Better?
you go.
So I was there this afternoon and I understand the problem. So when you go there, you just see these private houses and you think, well, it's right in front of her house. Who else is going to park there? But there are apartment buildings down the street from her. And what she's saying is the people who live in the apartment buildings, they don't have available parking. They're the ones who are parking there. And the problem is the cars that are coming up Mamaroneck from there are really speeding. And if there's limited visibility coming at, so their driveway is a kind of a downhill. So they're coming up a hill and they don't really have an opportunity to have a good view of the oncoming traffic. So I understood what she's saying, that if they had more room, that if they removed the parking 1 or 2 spaces by her driveway, it would give them a better chance of exiting their driveway safely. I clearly understood what she was saying.
Yeah,
Especially with the speeding traffic coming up Mamaroneck Avenue.
right, definitely. So I don't know if that's possible. Is that allowed to put yellow lines or no parking on Mamaroneck Avenue?
It would have to be something that's a restriction that's promulgated and adopted by the Board of Trustees. I just don't know, Robert, I know, there's a number of homes out there on Mamaroneck Avenue that are probably in a very similar
Right.
situation. I don't know how many would want a similar type of accommodation, or what that would mean to the,
That might be a problem.
yeah.
Dan, is there a way that, how, does the village do any type of permitted parking or that type of thing where it's for residents only during certain periods of time? Do they
I feel
do any of that?
I feel like letting Laura answer this.
Me? You want me to jump in?
No, because, well, so you can only have permit parking on residential streets or a public street with a special act of the New York State Legislature. So we would have to request something from the New York State Legislature for that. I mean, I think where you typically see that, and I think it's going to be a lot like Washingtonville, where it's going to probably be the same instance with the apartments. It's where you have development that took place before a time when, there was it 2 cars in every, a chicken in every pot and 2 cars in every garage, as the saying went. So, I mean, they were built at a time before
Right.
they were required to provide adequate on-site parking. And we were able to get similar at that legislation for areas in Rhinebeck and Washingtonville that, basically in close proximity to the train station, because what was happening, in addition to Washingtonville, we just have more cars than available spaces. We needed to prevent cars from parking for free on those valuable spaces during the daytime. Keeping that parking open for the Washingtonville residents and the Rhinebeck residents. At least in those situations, we had both the mass transit and we can make the argument there was both mass transit related and, development related. I don't know that, there is a lack of parking so severe that the needs of that parking or that apartment cannot be met on just all the streets around there. But the short version is you need a special act of the New York State Legislature, and that can take several years.
So, Lieutenant, do you think, is it maybe an enforcement piece on Mamaroneck Avenue right there, that people are driving too fast, or?
I'll let the chief, the lieutenant.
Yeah, I mean, we're out there all the time, issuing summonses for that. I mean, that's separate and apart.
Yeah.
I think what she's talking about is going to be difficult, even if vehicles are coming at a normal speed.
Yeah.
It's going to be difficult for her to get out of her driveway.
Yeah, and the good news is, now that the county is repaving Mamaroneck Avenue, people are going to feel more safe with a nice, fresh, clean roadway, and that the impetus for slowing or driving a little bit slower is not going to be there anymore for many years.
You mean the potholes were actually slowing traffic down?
Absolutely.
They're serving as their own personal speed bumps.
Yeah. No, it's very few people can make that connection between the potholes slowing the cars down, because everyone wants their road paved every year. But
Well,
it's
as someone that just paid $500 over the weekend to replace tires because of potholes, that stinks.
Me too. 2 tires.
Me too.
Dan, what would be the lift like along Mamaroneck Avenue there? Like there's it's like 4 homes, it seems like. What if we painted not easements, but the buffers in front of each driveway, or signage, or something relatively low lift?
Well, the question I have is, and I'm pretty sure there are no parking spaces lined out there. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's accurate.
Okay. Well, actually, even if there were, the county's going to repave it and get rid of them anyway. It could mean, loss of what, 8 to 10 parking spaces, depending on, how it would shift parking. As far as the lift, it's just a matter of, when we had the training session with Shannon, she talked about the cost of putting up a sign. And the cost is, it's not just the materials, it's everyone who has to come out and work on that, mark out the utilities. So, it's the cash cost is, the dollar cost is not that great, but for all the ancillary work, that's where the soft costs add up.
Dan, what about an information campaign to the folks within the apartment building? Because I would think that the residents, it would be their responsibility really to not obstruct their own view or their neighbor's view, but perhaps people are just doing it unsuspectingly and just trying to fit more cars in. What if we mailed really letters as well as email the folks within the apartment building raising the concern?
Well, I don't know if it's just the apartment building. It could be the residents who live out there and are parking in front of their homes. I don't know. I'm fairly confident that not all homes along Mamaroneck Avenue have driveways. So
No, I'm pretty I would say definitely it's the apartment building people.
I'm not sure to what extent there are homes out there that don't have driveways. So you have residents who live on the same, I guess would be the west side of Mamaroneck Avenue, who are parking on street because they have no driveway of their own to park in.
This is where I'm kind of thinking to jump in as we were piggyback off of what Ryan was trying to say about residential parking. I don't know how many years ago we started the residential parking. I want to say it was 2012. We started vying for that, but we've grown in leaps and bounds where we're having parking issue throughout our village, you know, and we're starting to like try to piecemeal things to make everybody feel safe and to get out of their driveways and to find ample parking. I know it would probably take years and years to do this, but I mean, Larchmont did something similar where all of their residents have residential parking. There's no parking on their street overnight in Larchmont. We couldn't do that here. That's an impossibility. But a thought process would be that all residents who live in the village of Mamaroneck have a residential parking pass. And the people who do not have passes can't be on the street between, and I'm throwing out a fake number, and it's just projection, you know, 11:30 at night to 4:30 in the morning. And that's where our enforcement goes out and removes cars without parking permits village-wide, giving every resident the opportunity to have a parking space. Because we could sit here every meeting, probably for the next 5 years, having very similar discussion and not being able to find resolve, because this is bigger than just a certain neighborhood or a certain street. This is, you know, village wide, and it's only good. It's not going to shrink. It's going to keep growing. But my house has 5 cars. So does half of our village. 2 to 3 cars.
I agree with Laura. I mean, this is a classic Pareto improvement here, Dan. I mean, this is making everybody better off without making anybody worse off, except people that are non-residents parking on our streets. So
Yeah, but that's the thing is, you know, why we needed the special legislation is because you cannot permit on-street public parking.
My question is, I understand that. How do we mirror what Larchmont did, and how are they different than us?
I can ask, is it no parking at all, or is it like snow? like
Actually,
public-
Larchmont has no parking on their streets in the evening. So really, unless you have a special permit. So I'm thinking, I don't know, in just my thought process, bouncing off of what we have existing as far as residential parking goes. If we couple and mirror them and have conversation and have, you know, I don't know how many meetings we'd have to have, but to find out how they work it, where it's a comprehensive plan for the village of Mamaroneck and resident, you know, of course, people would be able to park anywhere they choose during the day. But in those specific hours of the evening, every resident that is registered to the village of Mamaroneck and that owns a home or rents a home in the village of Mamaroneck has a residential parking sticker, and they are allowed 1 or 2 stickers, and they can park on the street if they have no parking. This is just a wild example off the top of my head.
I can talk to the village administrator in Larchmont to get the scoop on that. I mean,
Right, because most everyone where it's different from us, they're on the flip side. They have parking. They're off the streets. Larchmont has everyone off of their streets at night. The people that are left on the streets are people who have no possibility of off-street parking, and they have a special permit. And then
that's a year-round restriction, not
it's a
just
year-round restriction. And then if you go into the Washington Square section, it's really more prevalent there, because those are mostly all of your apartment buildings near Leafy Lane and off of Myrtle. So the people that are parked on the street in the evening and overnight that aren't towed are people who have residential parking stickers, because they cannot park in the apartments because they do not have room. And in that area of Leafy Lane and Myrtle Boulevard, they were having the same issue. That's why it's in totality across the board. It's just not like one section of the town that has, you know, residential parking, kind of minimalistic to Eastchester and Tuckahoe that mirror us. that only a certain portions of their villages have residential parking,
Yeah,
where
yeah, I know.
comprehensively Larchmont went across the board.
Yeah, I know
Kind of reversed it day and night.
Eastchester has a couple of them. I know on Garth Road, but that's
Mhm.
because the apartments and
Right.
and those were built in the 1920s. I'm just looking up Larchmont's code right now just to see what it says.
Brian, could I suggest that our next steps be that Dan look into this a little bit and see what what the policy might be in Larchmont, and also consider this particular case with Jennifer, what some solutions might be as far as painting out, and move to the next topic.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it's a much bigger conversation that we're getting ourselves into, so I think it makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer, so much. It's a really important point you brought up.
Thanks a lot. Have a good night.
You too.
You too.
Dan, do you mind promoting the 914 number? Hello?
Hey, it's Lou Young. How you doing?
Hey, Lou.
Well,
Thanks
we got
for
a
coming.
budget. Yeah, sorry we're late. I can't get in on the Zoom, so I'll just listen here.
No, all good. Thanks for making it. Dan, do you mind promoting Stephanie Russo?
Absolutely. Well, I don't mind. Yes.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, yes.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good.
Can you hear
So,
me?
yeah, we
Oh,
can hear
yes.
you.
Oh, good.
So what's
I was
top of
just
mind?
joining the call on behalf of, I guess the four-way stop that was being talked about on North Berry and Jefferson.
Yes.
I don't know if I missed, I dialed in a little later, so.
No,
You're
you
the
didn't.
first.
You're the first. There was a lot of talk on this Stanley Avenue, Mount Pleasant. I thought there'd be more folks on the North Barry and Jefferson, but you're the first.
Yeah, so I've been a lifelong Mamaroneck resident. I grew up here, born here. My family has a business here, like through and through. So I've seen it change a lot. I've recently moved to Meadow Street, and about a year ago, I had written a letter about just the traffic in general in that area. I have a 10-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter. So my 10-year-old is a little bit more mobile, walking to school, to the nearby parks. So I was just happy to see that we were thinking that way, just because it's a very trafficked area. I know that the daycare around the area uses that crossing to use that park on Jefferson.
Mhm.
And I know my own son, he's not comfortable riding his bike or walking towards Florence during high traffic times, just because the speeds that people are flying down the street, or they're not really stopping at that pedestrian walkway. So I think a four-way stop would help. I know a lot of the traffic is an issue more so towards Halsted and North Berry. I had mentioned or had asked maybe like a four-way stop there would have been ideal, similar to the one on East Boston Post Road and North Berry, but I think this is a good start.
Now that makes sense. That area, I'm sure we all know it quite well. Similar to the conversation we were having earlier with folks coming off Mamaroneck onto Mount Pleasant. I suspect the speed in which people are traveling is excessive coming down North Barry, going both ways, either towards Halsted as well as making your way towards 95 and back out to Mamaroneck Avenue. So definitely I could empathize, certainly. Does anyone Robert, or if anyone else has, have you guys walked this area or driven, or any thoughts?
I was there today. Interesting that there are a whole bunch of traffic signs in that location. There's kids crossing. State law stop for pedestrians. There's a crosswalk. There's a stop sign. There's one stop sign in that intersection on Jefferson. Yield for pedestrians and crosswalk. Two signs about the fire station. One speed limit 15. I would ask Dan to weigh in whether a four-way stop sign is appropriate or can be done, or.
So, well, a couple items. I know first, you also have a fire station right there.
Right.
So you may want to ask the fire department to opine on that as well. The warrant for an all-way stop is, when you have 5 or more accidents in a 12-month period, and we can certainly look at the data. I don't know what it says. I know we try to do a lot out there because of the fact that we do have, like you said, a park, daycare, a municipal fire station. It's a pretty busy area. I don't know how much this is affecting it, but between the work that's been going on Mamaroneck Avenue for, between what's going on right now with
Detour.
redoing the county's work, last year with we have Hillside Bridge, which is closed. We have, and the detour goes along there. We have there's something else which I just totally lost track of. There are a lot of things impacting that right now, but I think you may want to at least hear from FD because of the impact on their fire station. And I know we have the lines there to try to do not block the box lines. I think what you described may be getting close to sign pollution, Robert, which can be just as bad as which is actually worse than no signs in some instances, because when you have so many signs blend in.
And Dan, just to, there's one sign that says yield for pedestrians and crosswalk that's hidden behind a telephone pole. You cannot see the sign through the telephone pole.
So I think that might be the sign that's conflicting. There's another sign that also says stop for pedestrians. So I think for like more novice drivers, that's very confusing. I mean, the main issue is that this area, there's a lot more younger families moving to this part of the town and a lot more foot traffic. People, traffic patterns have changed with more deliveries and Ubers. I know that just from living on a one-way street, we had issues where cars were flying up the wrong way. And additional signage and police presence definitely helped alleviate that a little bit. The main issue on North Berry is more so that crossing on Halsted, which I know that if you spoke with the crossing guard there, he's mentioned to us a few times some pretty scary scenes where he's had to throw a stop sign in the road to deter cars from turning into pedestrians. So it's something that, regardless if there's a lot of. Oh,
So
go ahead.
I do want to mention about Halsted Avenue. So we do have a project to basically resurface the entirety of Halsted between Mamaroneck Avenue and the town of Harrison border. We've also submitted a grant application to the state DOT to redo all of the sidewalks, which would include upgrading of the traffic signal at the Halsted and North Berry Avenue intersection. One of the problems right now, and I've talked to the commission before about the the signal hardware that controls these the traffic signals, the timing, and things like that. So that traffic signal, it works, it's sufficient, but it doesn't have the modern technology, which would allow for the installation of pedestrian countdown signals, or, better timing. So we'd look to possibly replace that if we're lucky enough to get a grant. So it is something that is on our radar, Ms. Russo.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to let you know that we're aware of that issue, and, we're trying diligently to address some of the traffic and pedestrian issues along that entire Halsted Avenue corridor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. And there's two other takeaways, like, let's, Lieutenant Falcone, would you be able to get us the crash data for that intersection between Jefferson and North Barry?
Yes,
And I don't think we have the FD on the line, but we could follow up with them and get their opinion as far as like what they've seen and any suggestions that they may have.
There's usually I don't want to cast aspersions. There's usually several people drinking coffee that, some of the old time volunteers who like to drink their morning coffee at the stations. They're out there pretty
Probably
frequently.
seen it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. And I know a lot of other folks wrote in on this one, so I know it's
Yeah,
very
no, thank you.
topical.
And I know that the fire department there has been very helpful with crossing, not only the daycare that uses it, but also some other children that are hesitant to cross. So it's nice to know that it's on everyone's radar.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for making time, Steph. So the next item, it's the Harmon Drive, amending the truck restriction. Dan, I think you may, either Dan or Robert, you may have the most to add on this specifically, if you want to kick it off.
Well, I sent, the reason I asked this to be added is because, it's been a topic of discussion. One of the items is that, one side of Harmon begins in the town of Mamaroneck, and the other side begins in the village of Mamaroneck. And the truck restrictions don't match. So on the town of Mamaroneck side, they restrict trucks over 5 tons. The village restricts all trucks. So, conceivably, someone, from the town who's coming in from the town of Mamaroneck side, is obeying a posted restriction and when they get on the road, but is in violation when they get halfway down the road, and there's no escape valve for them to, get off the roadway before that happens. So I think the town has asked us in the past to look at, trying to match our restriction, because it creates a pretty comical enforcement issue at some point. That, at one point someone's breaking the law, someone's not breaking the law, but then they are breaking the law because they just, kept going on a road. So we could ask the town if they would consider matching our restriction, or, is it something that we want to match the town's restriction?
Is there any, is there a reason why they match, or is it just the administrative thing? Like, is there one restriction that's better than the other? Or?
I think that, so 5 tons is a pretty small amount for a truck. I mean, I think, you're talking a 10,000 pound vehicle, certainly a semi truck is well in excess of that. I think probably even most like U-Haul trucks would be in excess of that, but you still probably have an allowance for local deliveries, because, someone's getting an Amazon delivery, or someone's getting, a delivery of something that comes on a truck. It's got to get to the property somehow. So I said we could either, there is an inconsistency on both sides. So I'm just looking at, what is the preferred way to try and address that inconsistency.
That's fair. Do you want to send an email to the town? Would it be in the town? Like their,
Yeah, I
their
can
court?
reach out to the town administrator
Okay,
and ask her, what they want to do. I'll start with the town engineer first. Because I think he may be most directly involved in the restrictions. So, and I meet with him every month on Waverly Avenue Bridge and Hillside Bridge, so I have plenty of time to talk to him.
That
Thanks,
might be
Dan.
that might be something to consider where those trucks are gonna end up. Because really inevitably coming off of Harmon Drive, they're coming through the industrial area and they're trying to come through Waverly Avenue, through Washington Street, through, Center, Hoyt. They're not getting directed to Hoyt. So they're gonna keep going straight. So it's where they're gonna end up is probably the consideration of what we should allow, what
Yeah,
the
so-
result is gonna be.
I don't know if you were on the were on the commission yet, Laura, but there was I asked our traffic engineer, not specifically about the industrial area, but more about, I'm not about that side of the industrial area, but Fenimore and Mamaroneck Avenue and better signage for the trucks so they don't drive under the railroad bridges.
Mhm.
So he did prepare a report with recommendations. I don't know if you were on the commission when I sent that out. If not, I'll send that out later. But it did make some recommendations about how to, properly to make sure you have the proper signage out there, enough signage to advise the truckers who, hopefully are have at least a commercial grade GPS, but I think that's part of the problem. And I think the issue that was, yes, Robert. But you're muted.
There you
Okay,
go.
so may I speak?
Hmm?
Yep.
May I speak?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so I sent an email that I noticed a bunch of new traffic signs. Harmon Drive is one of those areas. And I wanted to have and I think we need to have a conversation about, Ryan commented, other people have commented, that when there are new signs, traffic signs, I think it's important that the traffic commission be notified so that we're aware as we're dealing with some of these locations, what's being done to ease traffic issues. Is there some way that we can be included in notice when these things are done or about to be done, so that we're dealing with the traffic issues at these locations, and it'll be very useful not to suddenly see, okay, there's a sign there, that we have some advance notice that this is being done.
Do you know were those signs in the town section or the village section?
Village section, I'm talking about right from Harmon to Waverly and Hill Street, which is just one block. In fact, there was a sign on Harmon, just as you enter Harmon from Rockland, no trucks. Speed limits. There are a bunch of signs that are warning drivers that a stop sign is approaching. I've never seen them before, but there's a whole bunch of them.
Let me take a look at the street view, because let me just pull that up.
Bob, are you saying those are new?
They're new to me. They might have been there before, but I don't recall seeing them.
Yeah,
And they look like new signs,
Right.
not old signs that are weather worn or something. They look brand new.
Yeah, I'm
who's
gonna,
putting these signs up?
I'm gonna pull up the street view. It might just be replacement of worn signs, but let me pull up the street view to see.
And there are other streets, like Center Street has a bunch of new signs. Waverly has a bunch of new signs. I'm sure that those are brand new. I've never seen them before.
Is there a database that's kept when a sign is issued? What street, what location, what it says? Who
So-
issued it?
So the village code has a record of all the, and I was talking about this before, Every regulatory sign that's out in the street, when something we can enforce, is in the village code, or it's supposed to be in the village code. I was suggesting that a project I would like to see done at some point is have a field verification of that to identify, what is in the code, what we can confirm is both in the code and out in the field. What we can confirm is both or that's in the code but not out in the field, and what is people will put out there themselves or at some point. So I'm going to share my screen. If you give me a second.
I'm taking
Dan?
Harmon from Rockland through Hill Street, heading towards New Rochelle, that area.
Yeah.
Dan, when the signs are created and processed, is there a record of when they're processed, what the sign's title is and where it's issued to?
There are work orders. What we tried to do at some point in the past, and this is I think the way to do it would be to just document, have someone go out there and document, geotag everything, and you just have a data layer in our GIS system showing what sign is at what location. So so Robert, this is October 2021. So
I think that 11-ton weight, I think that's new. And along Harmon, the no truck, I think that was there before, but as you go further down Harmon, there are new signs there too.
So this is 2018, 2017.
Oh, so it's
So it
been there a
wasn't
long
there in
time.
2013, yeah. But I mean, that might have actually been put out by Metro North, because the next bridge up is a Metro North bridge. So 2015, speed limit sign, no truck sign, stop sign. 2021, stop sign, truck, no truck. And I think we actually relocated the, okay, why can't I get there? Yeah, we relocated the stops, the speed sign to this utility pole. So let's look at then let's see. So we had to put a fluorescent dead end sign up
At
sometime.
Hill Street.
Yeah, so here's September, let's go to August 2016, just a dead end sign over here and the street sign. In July 2018, just the dead end sign and the street sign. October of last year, we had the dead end sign here, the street sign, and this more visible dead end sign.
I guess I never noticed them.
Yeah. You know what, my guess is as you develop your love for traffic safety, being on
Right.
this mission, you start noticing these things.
But
So,
there are clearly some, I don't know that we're going to get to Center Street, but I attended, I'm sorry to change the subject. I attended a meeting at St. Thomas Church last week for the Hispanic population in the flats. And they complained about speeding on Center Street by the Community Resource Center. And I'm very familiar with that street. I know for sure that they put in signs, safety signs and traffic crossing on Center Street, right by the CRC. That wasn't there before. And I'm assuming that was because the police department attended that meeting and heard their complaints. And on Waverly, from Fenimore, as you enter Waverly, there are 3 new signs about huge yellow signs that I am sure were not there before.
Yeah, let's see, so here's October 21.
If you go to the community research, so
There they are.
there
Yeah,
they are, right, those weren't there before.
okay, I mean, my guess, it was probably,
Those are new.
yeah, they. Yeah. So it was, probably requested at that meeting. I think my guess is if the chief was at that meeting.
Yes, she was, she
She
was.
probably put the work order in directly and worked with Public Works to get that done. But yeah, again, that's, these, because these are yellow signs, they're not regulatory in nature. So we don't, that's why it doesn't require any sort of administrative or legislative action from
That's
the
good.
Board of Trustees or a recommendation from the Traffic Commission. And I think, we try not to, I think in certain circumstances, we try to use our better judgment. And in the cases where, we think something may be, quote, a no-brainer, we just want to, get it done instead of having to, go through that process. But like I said, everything, when you see something yellow, it's always it's advisory, not regulatory. We can enforce that because it's state law that you can't, you have to yell for someone in a crosswalk. But we don't need signs to enforce something that, a question you answer on your permit test, that we all took many decades ago, in my case. I'm sure everyone here only took their permit tests within the last 5 years.
No, it's good to know, learn something new about the yellow signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can't enforce that. It is advisory.
Okay.
All right, the next item, it's I don't think the residents here, but it's the Rockland Avenue and Harmon Avenue pedestrian car issues. I'm not sure if folks saw the email or the picture that she sent over, but there's no sidewalk. I believe it's on Harmon. And I think Robert,
It's
you
on-
might
it's
have
on Rockland.
commented on
It's
this.
around the corner.
Oh,
from
it's
where I live.
Rockland. Yeah.
It's from Waverly to the bridge, to the
Yeah.
Rockland Bridge. It's awful.
I walked that again the other day, last week, last Friday, and thought about it again, that it's just, there's got to be something that we can do over there. And I know, Dan, you said that the home owns part of the property across the street and that type of thing, but there just seems to be, if we could get our traffic engineers eyes over there to see what is possible. We have all these children walking to school. It's a main thoroughfare for pedestrians, and I think there's a lot of cars parked over there because I guess there's not a lot of parking, but there's got to be a way to cut some sidewalk to where people aren't forced to walk into the street. People aren't forced to walk on sort of a gravel mixture that seems kind of not
Yeah,
very
yeah.
safe.
Anything is possible with money, and that it is what it is. I think the point I was just trying to make last time is, there are a number of traffic safety priorities, especially with sidewalks. Do you have, and I sent you a memo with kind of going over what some of those projects are right now. We're talking, several $1 million that we're looking to spend on various sidewalk projects. I don't know how, is there a recommendation that you would make to the board about, the priorities of those types of projects and how we're looking to do it? Because, what I've prioritized in the capital budget is, the projects in and around Mamaroneck Avenue School, because, you know, it's eligible for,
Mhm.
we already got several phases funded by community development block grant funds. Then there were, you know, the sidewalk on Old Post Road between, you know, Orienta and Post Road. I think there's other sidewalks in Orienta. We have sidewalks that we're looking at along Old White Plains Road and Grand Street. I said, I'm not poo-pooing anything. I'm just saying, you know,
Yeah.
you've seen it, look what we're looking to, you know, the types of projects that we're looking to recommend as the staff, you know.
Isn't this, Dan, sorry, isn't this something that the traffic consultant would be best suited to provide some kind of practical, reasonable solution to whatever extent to make these locations safer? Don't we want to rely on their expertise?
Yeah, no,
We're not qualified to figure out what to do here.
yeah, but if you're looking for a sidewalk or some sort of project out there, I'm just, you know, again, it's a priority among other priorities. We can certainly look at, you know, asking, I can certainly see if it's, you know, a conceptual study, but, you know, once you have the study and it says, you know, you can do A, B, C, D, and E, ultimately it has to be, you know, looked at in the context of everything else. So I want to, I think, I mean, in terms of what I provided to you and kind of that you know, memo on the various, you know, projects we're looking out there.
Mhm.
I mean, did you have any sort of?
Which are fantastic. And I mean, I think, you know, I think Rob might have said it earlier, like, you know, the prioritization, like, when we talked about it, I think the priorities are strong, Dan. I mean, I think it's just this one area that's come up a couple times, and, you know, maybe not this fiscal, but maybe next fiscal or the next. But, you know, I think we need to have longer time horizons for our village. I mean, none of us are leaving anytime soon. This is an area that seems to be more and more trafficked by by people trying to get to the high school. It's also a nice cut through and to get to the trail, right? So I guess there's this, you know, maybe it's not an immediate priority, but do we get some eyes on it from the engineers to come up with a solution, you know, 24 months, 36 months down the line, and just get it somewhere in front of the decision makers?
Yeah, I mean, and what we could always do, and, you know, this is kind of how we're dealing with the Fenimore Prospect intersection. You know, if we have a sidewalk contract out there, you know, the way we bid out projects, it's all item numbers. It's, you know, we need X number of cubic yards of this, Y number of square feet of that. You know, if we have a price, we have a price. If it's a good price, we could always, you know, talk to the board about, you know, getting some additional work done if that allows, and, you know, not to skip ahead to Fenimore Prospect, but that's, again, what we're doing there. We're going to use an existing contract that we have with our contractor who's going to be doing the sidewalks on Waverly Avenue and East Prospect Avenue. And we have locked in pricing, and we're going to, you know, move forward with him doing that work over at Fenimore Prospect as well. So, you know, and we've done that before where, you know, if we've gotten good pricing, we've, you know, spoken before, said, you know, we've got good pricing. You know, we'd like to talk to you about getting some additional funding to do this, because, you know, it might be something easy to get accomplished at this point.
Well, people are really excited over in my blocks on Heathcote Hill. They're really excited about the crossing, a safe crossing finally on Fenimore.
Yeah. So, you know, the update on that is we are going to have a resolution on the next meeting for the Board of Trustees, which is on the 25th, to provide us funding so we can move forward with that. You know, we're gonna do, the contractor is gonna do the sidewalks and the, that we'll call the hardscaping. And then as a staff, we're gonna use our village forces to do the landscaping, the signage, and the pavement markings. and the traffic control as necessary. So we'll bear some costs of that, but we wanted to present an option to, move this forward and expedite it, especially because we already have a contractor on around who we know does good work.
That's great.
We had a kind of an email exchange about software that may provide information for us about traffic signage on streets. And Ryan mentioned something about GIS and some of the village software. Ryan, can you kind of add to what you were suggesting that might be available?
Yeah,
about
do
that?
we have any GIS software, Dan,
we do.
that kind of maps things out for us to show where different signage is? ArcGIS is kind of like the standard for a lot of social sciences geographers.
Yeah,
to use.
we have ArcGIS.
Okay.
In the past, we did an inventory of the signs, and I think Laura brought that up, when we were just talking about Harmon, and I would very much like to do that. Make sure what we have, and again, I'd like to not just inventory what's out there, but make sure that our code, everything that's supposed to be out there in the code is out there, and identify stuff which has been put out there over the years and is not in the code, because you'd be shocked. And that's on that, I think as a general rule, it's probably done about every 10 years. But basically what you do is you can just send out a summer intern with a vehicle and a cell phone. They can, take pictures and geotag everything. And it just goes right into a data layer that you can import into a GIS.
Exactly. I was going to recommend, as an educator, having interns from, SUNY Purchase or Westchester Community College. This would be an amazing thing to have on somebody's resume that they did a GIS project for the village of Mamaroneck. Really cool.
Yeah, I would also incorporate not just, the confirmation, maybe also have them provide commentary on the condition of the sign. Because, the stuff just, it's exposed to sunlight for years on end, and you know what that's gonna do to the sign. So it is something that's on my radar. But yeah, again, that would be we would have to have, someone who understands how to, and like you said, it's usually someone in demography, geography, the planning sciences. They're all very familiar with GIS and the application of GIS. And, I can talk a good game about what it can do, but, I admit to being a bit of a Luddite when it comes to GIS technology.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ryan. The last item, this came up. I was had the pleasure of participating in the Safe Streets Committee, which brings together a couple different PTA groups and representatives from Mamaroneck and Larchmont. Jerry was also in attendance as well. And there were a couple of updates that I provided as far as work that we'd been talking about. And there was something that they wanted us to look into, and that's on Carpenter Place, which is behind the high school, behind Mamaroneck High School. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with it. I went over there myself as it's a relatively small block, and I just hadn't had a reason to be back there. But nevertheless, there's no parking sign with a parking restriction prohibiting parking between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. And from the Mamaroneck PTA and various other stakeholders in the meeting, the ask was if the no parking can be extended an hour earlier because of the number of pedestrians and kids that are walking to school as well as being dropped off. They said that hour between 7 to 8, it's like mayhem with cars that are still there and cars pulling out and kids going into the school. And it's just a really critical and dangerous time that there's just a lot going on that block in terms of getting kids into the school. So right now go on.
So it's drop off and pickup activity?
Yeah, like right now, it's no parking 8 AM to 4 PM. They just want it extended an hour.
Well, so, and Lieutenant, you can comment too, but if that's the concern, no parking is not really the restriction they want. It would be a no stopping, no standing restriction. Because you can still do drop off and pickup activity as long as you're not, if you're just dropping someone off, you're not parking. So that's not that would still be a permitted activity.
No, I think what Ryan, I think what he's trying to say is that he wants to move it up to 7 o'clock because the
Yeah,
car is still standing there and the drop off is causing them to drop off in the middle of the street rather than having that free area in the hour that you're dropping your students off at school to be open.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking it would be confusing. It could be I'm not. I would just say it might be confusing to have, a no standing restriction for 1 hour, then no parking restriction. I would just suggest, harmonizing the restriction across the entire time frame, because like I said, you can still have drop off and pickup activity if you're with a no parking restriction.
I think they're okay with that. Like Laura was saying, like they want the ability to still be able to stop, but they're having to navigate through cars that are just parked there with no one in them
Okay.
because you don't have to move your car until 8 AM when pickup and drop off activity starts before 8 AM.
Right, the
So-
action is already taking place.
Right.
Okay.
If you take a look, I can share my screen. I'll show
Yeah,
you
I'm
exactly.
just confused. Like I said, it's a difference between a no stopping restriction and a parking restriction, because they are two different things. And if the issue is the drop off, the vehicles related to the drop off and pickup activity, that's not necessarily you need something stronger than a parking restriction. I just,
Yeah, no, I understand what you were saying. Like, you see, here's an example of one of the signs, like no parking 8 AM to 4 PM on school days.
yeah.
Like their suggestion from the school is to extend it an hour. Or perhaps extend it 2 hours. It's 7 AM to 5 PM. Just to make the pickup and drop off less dangerous than what it is.
Okay, I have, I'm perfectly fine with that. I mean, I don't see an issue with that. I would just make sure it's the right restriction. I would recommend that if you're gonna recommend this, that you consider making it a no stopping restriction, because that's actually more holistic. Incorporate, it would prevent more activities, which I think that's it's not just a parking issue, it's a drop off pickup issue, which is, in that case, the car's just idling and sitting out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. What I could do is I could reach out to them and ask like for them to provide some color as well. Be like, it's a more holistic. It's gonna make it ultimately safer if you prevent any sort of stopping during that time frame as opposed to no parking. So like,
Yeah, I mean, it
yeah.
seems like the no parking is to prevent students from, or teachers from parking there during school.
Right. Okay. All right. I'll take that as an action item. All right, that covers it all.
Boo.
Is there anything top of mind that anyone wanted to bring up?
I did mention to Laura that the manual, or the document that she sent me from New Rochelle, I forwarded that to my boss, the village manager, because that's, I think when I spoke to you a couple months back about proper location of speed humps or speed bumps, it pretty much mirrors what you would see there. It's not to be, you can't just you wouldn't put it on a road like Mamaroneck Avenue. You put it on a residential street that you have concerns with. You're not going to do it on a road that carries a lot of emergency vehicle traffic. So I did forward that to the manager, and I'll continue that conversation with him.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Laura.
Pretty packed, yeah. You're welcome.
Any other, we don't have to approve minutes, right? That's automatic. Dan, I think cleared that up last meeting.
Yeah, you can always vote to approve the minutes, but you're under no obligation to do so. They're just filed for the record with the
Yeah.
clerk.
Great. I thought that's what you said.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan.
We don't have them yet anyway from Michael, so.
And that's not a problem. Minutes can be approved at the next month, not a problem.
Yeah. And one last thing, rather than go through all the old business, I'm gonna sit down and go through and see which ones we can just remove, because I like, like, for example, Mamaroneck Ave at I-95 ramp crossing guard, like, that's just not gonna happen. I wanted to just briefly raise the Knollwood, the stop sign and speed bump, and any immediate actions we had coming from there. I think, Dan, we were talking about feasibility in like the speed hump program, as well as getting data on accidents there. So much of the minutes, I don't remember specifically what other action items we had there. I
Well,
just remember that being the biggest issue last meeting.
Yeah, I think Officer Yeager, who was in attendance, was going to try and track down the accident data. And now that I have, that item from City of New Rochelle, again, I want to follow up with my boss, because we talked about a pilot program in 3 to 4 locations, and just like everything, there's always so much work to get done that we have to prioritize it ourselves.
Yeah.
On the very 1,800 projects we're always doing. But summertime will be a good time to get that stuff done, so we can have it in time for a school year.
Got it. No, appreciate that. Was there any other business that folks wanted to raise?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it.
Brian, have you had an opportunity to follow up on Andre Garcia and that situation?
No, not yet. I owe that to Jerry, because I know that's important, especially, today's a good example of it. So I have that
Okay.
as a to-do.
I just want to be transparent, because this has been an ongoing issue and I don't know why it's taken so long. So we're allowed 7 commissioners. We welcome Laura, she became 6, but we have another opening. And at our meeting where Shannon gave us our training, Lou said that if somebody misses 3 consecutive meetings, they're automatically removed from the commission. So Lou, if you're here, I have 2 questions for you. If Mr.
I'm here.
Garcia, okay, here they come. If Mr. Garcia has been removed from our commission, why is he still listed on the Village of Mamaroneck website as part of our commission? And 2, let me ask the second question. And 2, if he has been removed, as you said, why hasn't the board appointed a replacement?
Excellent questions. I will inquire.
When will you get back to us?
Oh, I'll check tomorrow. On ask Dan. Dan, do you have any? On that?
I mean, I haven't looked into it. I mean, I can certainly ask. As far as the roster, the clerk's office maintains the roster, so it might just be a matter of updating it based on whatever administrative action has been taken.
We need a replacement.
Robert, that's not my lane. That's
I'm not saying.
the replacement is a board issue. I
It's a
stay
board
out of that.
issue
Yeah, I stay out of that.
and the village manager issue.
Well, the village manager doesn't appoint the board members.
The village manager is supposed to contact a volunteer who hasn't attended meetings and find out whether that person intends to continue, and if not, then
And
they're removed. That's the
and I would
village manager's job.
And, trustee Young just asked, and I will talk to the manager about that. I was just trying to say that I'm not gonna insert myself into a board of trustees process as far as
Okay,
the filling of a vacancy. That's be a little inappropriate.
It's a
Well, we
it's a
would,
good concern, Robert. No, sorry, Lou?
Yeah, there's 7 members, we need applications, so we'll see what we have.
No, thanks, Lou. Thanks, Dan.
And Rob, I just wanted to say thanks for all your emails these last few days. You did a lot of work visiting places and sharing. And for someone that's now commuting into the city most days, it was really useful reading over your notes and getting your perspectives and your ideas. An article you shared was really helpful. So I really appreciate as a fellow board member that legwork that you did, and really everybody that's on these calls. I mean, we're finally gelling and doing some stuff, so it feels really good. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for keeping us.
I'm hoping that as, we're learning these things, we can have conversations and discussions about pursuing and following up on some of these ideas that are out there that appear to be, potential solutions for some of our problems, especially the speeding problem. That's a real difficult issue to fix.
It's rampant, and especially in the flats. Washington Street is a cut through, and it's imminent as to when somebody is going to get hurt. It's not if. Traffic has increased twofold, and it's extremely dangerous. And as a commission, working as a team, that's my hope, is that we can help to foster resolve.
Yep, and I think the site visits, it really means a lot. You hear it from people when they dial in. They thank us countless times. Like, even if we don't have a resolution, like, they know these things take time and that we're not going to be able to put in a stop sign or a sidewalk immediately or change things on roads that we don't necessarily own. But I think the empathy goes a long way in terms of just building a better community overall. So definitely appreciate, everyone's involvement. So with that, I would like to make a motion to close the meeting.
Second. Unless
All right.
somebody has something to add.
The chair can make the original motion and you can second. So all you have to do is vote on adjourning the meeting now.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Lieutenant Falcone, you like to stay on? No. Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks for your
Dan.
help, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, Dan.
Lou.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Good seeing
All
you.
right,
Laura.
take care.
Bye,
Stay
Rob.
safe.
Seeing you